So now that that's done, let's go into lesson 3, identifying your quantum loops. I'm going to show you an example of how a man named Mark went from earning $6,000 a month. He couldn't crack more than $6,000 a month in over 20 years of working. But when he did this work, he literally became a 7-figure entrepreneur, made over $1 million in just 8 months. Not because he changed his strategy, but simply because he broke his quantum loops. And this is what's possible for you too.
We're going to show you how to build and really see what's going on, because again, this changed my entire life. When I started seeing this, guys, my entire life changed. I could finally see what was going on, focus on the parts I needed to process and what I needed to work on, and then everything changed. So let's look at this example from Mark. Mark was a client of mine. Let's put in here, Mark. He went from 6K, he never made more than $6,000 a month. And after understanding his patterns, he got to a point where within 8 months, he made $1 million in 8 months. His pattern looked like this. Whenever he hit 6K a month, it was super interesting actually. So he hit, let's say this is $6,000, 6, 1, 2, 3 per month. Whenever he hit $6,000 a month and he got to this level, what happened for him was his entire life crashed. It happened twice in his life where it hit $6,000 a month. And one of the time was he had this big issue where he had to leave the country. He was in a specific place in Canada. I believe the business he was working at crashed, and he had to essentially leave the country. And when he left the country, he got back into this point of nothing, hustle, alone, and stuck. And with that energy of hustle, nothing, being alone, and stuck, he ended up staying there for a while. And then he would manifest some more energy to go back and make more money. And he would rise again in his life and then come back to this point of $6,000, and something else would happen. His business would crash. Something would happen. Now, when I look at something like this and I see a pattern like this, what we had to do for Mark was we really went into what was the underlying emotion for him. $6,000, and you see this, was his money ceiling. He could never go back past this threshold. Why? Because for him, going past this threshold, again, was unsafe, but it also meant that it activated a core pattern of his that money was unsafe. And money meant being bullied. So money equals bullied. Why do I say this? Because when we went deep into him, what he realized is when he went back into his first relationship with money around 10 years old, he didn't have as much money in school and he got bullied by a lot of the people who had money. And for him, he attached this connection that because he didn't have enough, everyone who had money was essentially a bad person. So on top of being bullied and on top of this money ceiling, this was also a point of being bad for Mark. And as a result of that, whenever he hit $6,000 on a conscious level, he wanted to make that money. But on a subconscious level, it meant he was bad. It meant he was going to be bullied because that's what his energetic energy felt. And so even when he got here and he had these feelings of success and happiness, something always happened to cool him right back down into this core feeling that nothing, he has nothing, that he has to hustle, that he's weak, he's powerless, right? And he's ashamed. And these became very core drivers in Mark's life because, again, that's what happened when he didn't have money. And so his soul kept looping him right back down from here, all the way down, because he needed to process these feelings that he was weak, powerless, and ashamed, and had shame in his life. And when we started processing these feelings and started releasing it, he essentially negated the patterns in his life. And instead of having a pattern that was like this, instead of having a pattern that was essentially like this, he was able to remove this bottom part, really remove this need on his soul level to feel weak. And that now led to a life where instead of stopping at $6,000, he went straight to $1 million because he no longer had to deal with this up and down. And he completely took this downside off, took this energy that was pulling him down. Instead of having this, he canceled this completely from his life. And by canceling it from his life, all of a sudden, his entire life took off. This is the kind of thing that you want to be manifesting in your life. Let's look at another example. And you should be thinking right now about what's really going on in your own life in the same way. Another example is a person who had a business that was doing $3 million and went down to zero. And his case was slightly different because his case was all about rage and abandonment wounds and core abandonment wounds that he had in his life. And I'll show you what that looked like for him. So here you have Ronald, $3 million to zero. And the question you need to be asking yourself is why? Why is this happening? In Ronald's case, this was what it looked like. Got to 3 million, thought he was happy. All the emotions here was that he finally made it, proud, but also it meant he was safe. So even less than made it, proud, and all of these emotions, The core thing for him was that I finally feel safe and I am connected. But just when he thought he was connected, what happened to Ronald is this was a point where he manifested someone in his business who he put a lot of trust in, because at the core, to feel safe and connected, he needed trust. But in his case, he manifested someone that he put trust in. And at this point, he was abandoned, and this became his abandonment point. That essentially led through a series of events that his soul needed to go through to him crashing all the way down to a point here where now Ronald had $0. He was left stranded, $0, back into this point of can't trust. And his core emotion that came up was rage and anger. And because he had that rage and anger, he had to stay in this point. If Ronald is going to have a chance, if he's going to have a chance of reclaiming his business back and his life back and having this upward push without patterns, what he has to do is go into the core rage and the core anger that he has deep inside of him. And so the question we have to ask is, what is the source of this rage? And when we look deeper with Ronald, it was a case where both his father, dad abandoned him. And because his father and his mother abandoned him, anytime he made success, and this happened 3 different times in his life, every time he made some level of success, got to a $3 million business, he always manifested people who he put trust in, who abandoned him, caused everything to crash, and he had to start again. And he loops back and forth because at his core, he wants to trust life. He wants to trust someone. He wants to feel connected. And this is how that core emotion of trust, connection, leads into a core anger with life that he cannot trust life because he couldn't trust his mother and his father. And so he goes up, manifests another business, another level of success where he finally feels safe. And his core idea, his core thought, and the core thing that's causing an issue in his life is that I don't need anyone. And because I don't need help, I am safe. But again, we know that that's a lie, because what the soul would do, if the soul wants you to get to a point in your life where you can trust and feel safe, it would pull you right back down, until you process this core issue of trust, rage, and anger, so that you can actually depend on others in the universe, because that is where you now have true bliss. Ronald doesn't want money. Ronald wants safety. Ronald wants trust. Ronald wants connection. In your case, you can see how this pattern goes a little bit deeper, and you want to ask yourself, what am I really looking for? Because the universe will give you the opposite of what you're looking for until you can process it. Let's go into one more example. And for the next example, I'll show you my own example, right? Because this is where everything really crystallized for me. I had a situation where, I hit quite a lot of success at a certain point. And I remember this particular weekend where we just had a massive success in the business, where we had, I think, 10,000 people come into the business. Things exploded almost overnight, literally overnight. Like I woke up to 10,000 new people. And as soon as I hit that, I went into this point of, oh my God, we're taking off. Things are exciting. Let's accelerate. And what I noticed immediately, let's put it here. In my case, I hit this number, 10K new people. My inner narrative was that I was finally proud. I had self-worth. I was the guy. But as soon as I touched this point, literally as soon as days, even I think it was hours even, as soon as I got to this point, what immediately happened was this became my sick point. SP, we'll call it SP. I immediately got sick at this point. And while I got sick at this point, a few days later, there was a crash and people in my business started leaving. I started having issues with employees. So sick point and employees quit. Employees quit and I had a sick point. And immediately, boom, my life crashed. And I got to this point where I was alone. I was sick on my own and I had a deep weakness. Again, I felt powerless. I started blaming the world, shame. But at the core of it all was that I couldn't do it. And that feeling of not being able to do it kept me in this state of weakness. And instead of feeling the weakness, because that was what my soul wanted, I found myself forcing and fighting through. I could not rest. And I started trying to force out of this because deep down, I didn't want to feel these feelings. And when I didn't want to feel these feelings and I looked at myself, I was judging myself for ever feeling weak. And I never in my life allowed myself to feel weak. And I had this narrative that I didn't need support. What that kicked in for me was this narrative that I had to be self-sufficient and I couldn't depend on anybody. And because I couldn't depend on anybody, and that was my core narrative, I manifested my employees quitting. I manifested having that sickness because I needed to feel weak and feel that feeling and that core paradigm in myself that I couldn't depend on anybody. that put me back into the state of core weakness. And that weakness kicked in my hustler side. And I actually call that my bulldozer and my army mode. Let's put it that way. And this whole energy here kicked in my military paradigm. The thing is, when that energy of the army mode came in, I didn't allow myself to rest even while I was sick. I started pushing and grinding hard. And I had this energy, this very deep energy, that I was alone, that I could fight the world. It's me versus the world. And that was what I was using to catapult myself back up. That was my fuel source in that moment. And that again led to other situations where I manifested and went down. At the core of it, this point was unsafe for me. And one of the things you want to start learning about these patterns is when you're working with them and you're getting to your maximum point, because this unsafe point is also your 100% point, what you're going to start learning is how to work at 80%. We don't want to push our safety zone here into 100%. Instead, we always want to get to 80%. Work ourselves to 80%, allow ourselves calibrate there, because that's how you form a plateau where your nervous system can calibrate at this new level in your life. And because you can calibrate at this new level in your life, that becomes a new normal. From there, you can take another jump up, and we'll keep working with how this works and how it plays out. But because I overextended myself, at this point, at this sick point here, immediately crashed. The core thing I needed to feel was to actually allow myself to be weak, was to feel the part of me that needed support, that needed to depend on people. And the universe kept manifesting situations where I felt weak to really ask me the question, can I surrender? Can I surrender? Do I need to fight and have this hustler army mode persona where I have to drive forward with aggression? Because it was that aggression that kept leading me here. The energy will get me here, and then it will tap out, and the energy will tap out. And once the energy taps out, I'll manifest sickness, I'll manifest employees quitting, I'll manifest something going wrong. All of a sudden, boom, I'm right back down here. And as I start working with the patterns, the goal now is to get to a point where I work like this. And now the way that I work with my patterns is, instead of going up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down while hitting 100% of effort and drive every single time because of that army energy in me, what I do instead now is I simply go, hit about 80%, stay there for a little bit, calibrate my nervous system to that level. I might see a slight dip, something might happen, but it's no longer as drastic. And then I go back up. And then I go back up. And then I start leveling up and up. Because what I had to do was change this zone to a safety zone. Remember, up here, this is unsafe. This level here is unsafe. And what we're doing with this work is we're making this zone a safety zone, where I can calibrate and rest here and enjoy here, and it feels good for my body and my being, and I can take to the next level and the next level and the next level. This happens for women, this happens for sex, this happens for business, this happens for everything.
So the action step for lesson 3 is to use the workbook that we provided to identify the 3 recurring loops in your life. Do this for women, do this for situations, do this for business. You've already gotten a few examples. I've given you 3 examples of myself, Ronald, and Mark, from a monetary perspective, from a business perspective, from a relationship perspective. Now your job is to take action and identify the 3 recurring loops in your life. What you should do now is go through the workbook that's been provided, and you would get an actual breakdown like this and a chart already drawn out for you that you need to go through steps to complete. You will get to see the initial goal here, and you will also get taken through steps to understand the different achievement processes and what happened in your life. And from there, understand the driving force. And this would lead you all the way into building out your own pattern to understand what's going on. So you have this chart. Now your job is to go complete this chart. And this workbook has already been included for you. So go do that and identify 3 processes and 3 steps. You can fill this for just one main one, maybe finances. And then in your notes, go through the same thinking process, but then do it for other aspects of your life, other 3 aspects. If you just have one major one, do it for one major one. And once that's complete, you will then know the next steps to take from there.